and look at South Africa and its new law, which plans to introduce employment quotas for foreign nationals, which has been years in the making. This is according to the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, this comes amid a series of anti-migrant campaigns in the form of raids on foreign-owned businesses, as you have just heard, in several parts of Johannesburg by prominent organizers and several political leaders. Unemployment is at a record high in South Africa, nearing 35%, and some see foreigners as competitors for jobs, housing and other services. Joining us now to break this down for us is the Minister of Home Affairs, that's Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, who joins us via the virtual platform. Minister, thank you so much for making the time to get into the nuts and bolts of this sensitive time of our country. Can I just kick off our conversation by asking you to help us understand the sentiment inside Cabinet? Does it feel right now as though South Africa is carrying on its shoulders the weight and responsibility of other countries?
Good afternoon, Holly. Good afternoon to the listeners and the viewers up there. You are putting me in a tight corner, Holly, because I'm not a spokesperson of Cabinet. If you wanted to know sentiments on any issue about what's happening in Cabinet, I'm sure you are aware that the person who does that is the minister in the presidency who talks on behalf of Cabinet. You can ask me other questions, but please don't insist that I speak on behalf of Cabinet, because I'm not authorized to do so. but having said so,
yes,
yes, in 2015, there was a delegation that went to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee to discuss this question that you are asking about the fact that the country is starting to drown under the needs of healthcare, the need of education, the need of housing, and the need of jobs because of the issues of migration. That is why 3 weeks ago, you may be aware that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee sent their deputy commissioner, who is responsible for protection, to come and discuss these issues with us. And we arrived at about 7 outcomes of that meeting. It was a result of that trip of South Africans who went to United Nations to discuss this matter. Yes. All
right. Let's talk then, because you have in a way answered this question about whether or not South Africa is feeling the weight of what should ordinarily be the responsibility of particularly its neighboring countries. Let's talk about the new Labour migration policy. Now, this is something that is being proposed, as I understand it, Minister. So how far is Cabinet from approving this new regulation?
Let me start with the question you didn't ask, but you made a statement.
Sure.
Yes. Totally. You know, when you mention these facts as facts, people throw the word xenophobia at you. When I was in health, I mentioned this fact as fact because we had figures. I was talking figures and nothing else. For instance, as I'm sitting here, you can phone the MEC for health in Limpopo. 70% of the women who deliver in Musina Hospital will be foreign nationals. In 2018, there was a big story in the media about a lady from Burundi who was turned away from Steve Biko Hospital and went to Charlotte Maxeke and turned away and ended up delivering at Park Station. And I was called to the media about us being xenophobic, which was not true. And I was able to prove, I still remember it was May that year, I was able to prove that this Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, who you are claiming is xenophobic, in May that year, they delivered 700 women in the labor ward. And 400 of that 700 were not South Africans. But they delivered them. There were no qualms. They never refused to give such a service. So those are some of the things that you need to understand. Having said so, Koli, this issue, this question about labor migration, actually doesn't belong to Home Affairs. It's a labor and employment issue, an issue of the Department of Labor and Employment. And I'm aware that Minister Nesi is coming up with a labor migration policy. But because it touches many other departments, the President appointed an interministerial committee, which is chaired by Minister Nesi, the Minister of Employment and Labor. I co-chaired that with him. And we looked at this issue of labor and migration. But the act that is going to be so passed will be resident in the Department of Labor and Employment. It's not an act that the Minister of Home Affairs is in charge of. It's labor and employment because it talks about labor policies.
Yes. All right. Because you co-chair this meeting, and thank you very much for clearing that up for us, because you chair this interministerial committee on this proposed legislation, the motivation behind it, Minister, many have quoted you as pointing largely to the unemployment problem in South Africa, which is standing at a figure of nearly 35% right now. These regulations, though, Minister, if they were as urgent as they are being taken now, a cynic will say, but why are they only being pushed now when in 2008 and 2015 the country experienced heightened xenophobic attacks? And so why would we want to push these so aggressively at this juncture?
Well, it might be that is coinciding with certain attitudes and certain actions in the country. But these issues started long ago. The President, I think it's in 2019, yes, in the State of the Nation address, the debate, these issues of employment and migration were raised sharply by members of political parties. And I would like to invite you, Polly, to go to the Hansard and get that report about what was raised. The President then promised that he's going to form an interministerial committee to look at migration issues, because migration issues were being looked separately and individually by different departments. Then he said he'll put together an interministerial committee. Yes, as I said, it's co-chaired by me and Minister Nesi. But you have got Minister of international, relations, in that you have got the Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperation, you have got the Minister of Agriculture, you have got the Minister of Environment, you have got the Minister of Small Business, you have got the Minister of Social Development, you have got a Minister of Finance. They all sit together in that committee. So some of the things that are happening now are as a result of that committee sitting down and looking at the situation in South Africa. Firstly, looking at the situation internally, and then looking at the situation as it involves the issues of migration. Take, for instance, one of the things that were discovered in the very first meeting, Toli, was that there is a law in South Africa. It's also under the Department of Employment of Labor, whereby if you are an industrialist and you come from another country, you come and put up industry here, you are forced by that law that 60% of your workers, your laborers, must be sourced locally. And you can only come with 40% from the country where you come from. Yeah. Now, we contrast that to a company that is South African owned. In other words, that pertains to companies that are foreign owned, that they must have that quota. But we looked inside and found out that South African owned companies do not have such a legislation. In other words, they can hire 100% either way. And we don't think that is healthy under the conditions. And we said, why is there discrepancy? Why should a foreign an international industrialist be forced to obey certain laws, but somebody who's a South African, who is based in this country, doesn't have to obey those laws? And it was discovered that there's no act that covers them. And that act which you call job reservation, I heard some people call it job reservation. It stems from that we want to equalize between companies that are foreign-owned and companies that are South African-owned.
All right. I'm going to ask the question, Minister, and perhaps it's something that you should ponder over as we take a break, whether these proposed new laws are in a way fueling what we are seeing on our streets. I'm talking about Operation Dudula. So apply your mind to that. Let's take a break. We're going to continue the conversation in a moment. Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with the Minister of Home Affairs, that's Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, and we're discussing whether foreigners are to blame for South Africa's worsening unemployment problem. Minister, thank you very much for staying with us. Earlier, I asked you to apply your mind to whether what we are seeing on the ground is as a result of these new laws that are being proposed. But before I get there, let's just quickly flesh out for those who may not be aware what these new laws, labor laws, are proposing, particularly around issues of migration and how the country should perhaps prioritize South Africans versus foreign nationals.
There are calls that, react like other countries have done. Other countries have said, in this type of jobs, no foreigners should be allowed. And in fact, many countries on the continent have done that. They've said, this category of work, no foreigners, only locals. Now, there are voices that we should do the same here. Now, it's something that we have not done before. What we've sought to do, which we have now done, is to publish what we call the critical list, skills list rather. The critical skills list would in many ways address this in a very legal way, in a very formal way, and it's apparent to everyone what it is meant to achieve. What it does is it would enable people to bring in those skills that are critical that could be brought into the country. And we are a country that observes and subscribes to rule of law, and we would want all these matters to be handled in a way where we subscribe fully to the precepts of rule of law in this regard. But what we will do is we will seek to avoid any flare-up that will end up being a xenophobic type of event against our people.
Minister Motsoaledi, that's the President on Wednesday in his interaction with journalists, trying to explain what government is trying to do here, and he talks about the critical skills list. In simple language, Minister, just explain in brief details about what it is that we're trying to achieve here as a country.
Well, any country that deals with migration in a modern world will tell you that migration is for development, to develop both the inhabitants or citizens of a country and those who migrate to such a country. Migration mustn't just happen in a vacuum. It has to have a developmental element, otherwise it will cause problems. Now, if you do that, you realize that you need to source skills from elsewhere in the world. But you can't source any skill or any type of skill. You source skills that are critical to the economy, that will bring forth that development of both people who are coming to migrate into this country and people who are citizens of the country. Both need development. And you can only develop if you bring skills here that are critical. You can't bring any other type of skill. And that has always been there. It's not something that is new. It's a critical skills list, which in terms of the law must be published and gazetted by the Minister of Home Affairs, but is usually determined by the Minister of Higher Education, together with other agencies inside the country. Now, it must be reviewed every 4 years. In other words, viewed in terms of developmental needs of a country. Unfortunately, the last time we developed the critical skills list in South Africa is 2014, which means we took 8 years. There was a problem there because lots of things were being looked into. But now, eventually, on the 2nd of February, I gazetted that list. After a thorough process, which even went to NETLEG. Remember, in NETLEG, it was scrutinized by business, by labor, by government and community together. It spent something like 6 months there at NETLEG, that these are the skills that are needed to develop the country.
Do you worry, though, Minister, that these proposed new laws are in part fueling the anti-foreigner sentiment we are seeing?
Absolutely not. They are not. Clearly, some of the issues that the Interministerial Committee on Migration did was after the trucks were banned in 2019. In fact, it was my first assignment when I arrived in Home Affairs in May 2019, where trucks were being banned in Durban, and Minister of Police, Minister of Transport, myself, Minister of Employment and Labour ran to eThekwini. That issue of banning trucks was not within the purview of Home Affairs, but we were part of that. And in the meeting, what we were hearing was that some truck companies will refuse to employ anybody who is a South African. They will rather employ somebody who is not a South African, just so as to exploit them, not pay them minimum wage. So there is also an act of lawlessness inside South Africa, sometimes practiced by employers in distorting the market. So we cannot fold our arms and look and leave that. So we have started right at that time. We even met truck owners companies in Durban, and we told them that what they are doing cannot be legal. I remember in one meeting, one of them claiming that no, their trucks have got certain features that need critical skills to drive them. And I asked him what type of truck needs a critical skill that does not exist in South Africa. I said, anyway, let's assume that that is true.
Yeah.
There is a truck that needs a critical skill that doesn't exist. I said, can we show you as a certificate? Because in terms of the law, if a particular job needs a critical skill, you go to the Department of Employment of Labour. Only that law has always been there. It's not new.
Yeah.
You show them that you have advertised for this job and you could not get a South African after advertising. And it appears on the critical skill list published by Home Affairs. The Department of Labour will then give you a certificate, which you will take to Home Affairs and say, I've been allowed by the Department of Employment of Labour to source somebody with skills outside the country. Please give me the necessary visas and permits to bring that person.
All right.
That's how it went.
So, yes. Minister, you're quite clear, though, that the proposed new laws are not in any way responsible for the anti-foreigner sentiment we are seeing right now. In your considered view, therefore, who's to blame for operations or outfits such as Operation Dudula, for example, that is on the ground almost every weekend, inspecting businesses and saying that they are taking it upon themselves to do this because clearly South African authorities are not keen to do it?
First of all, the issue of changing laws, by the way, we've also discussed with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And I showed them that we are re-looking at the Citizenship Act of 1995, at the Refugee Act of 1998, and the Immigration Act of 2002. And we explained to them why we need to re-look at them. And they agreed. On the issue of inspecting businesses, you are aware that businesses are inspected by the Department of Employment of Labour, whether they conform with the labour laws. And of course, I do accede to the fact that they also accepted the fact that they are understaffed and they are not doing as many inspections as they could. Even when we arrived in Durban in 2019, we asked the Department of Employment and Labour to go and inspect some of these trucking companies which workers are complaining about, to see if it does conform, if they do conform to the law, employment and labor laws of the country. That are there. Issues like minimum wage, the right of workers, you know that It was one of the first laws that were enacted in South Africa after democracy. Because during apartheid, you could just be kicked out of any work and all that. But now we've got stringent labor laws that protect workers. And those laws protect everybody equally, whether you are a foreign national or not. Now, the problem, Toli, is if some trucking companies or any other company for that matter hires an illegal person, a person who came to the country illegally, it's illegal. It's illegal to hire that person. Because when you hire a person, you want their ID, you want their status, you want everything. They must go on the payroll, the employment laws of the country must protect them, the constitution must protect them, but it can't do so if they are illegal. So some of those are caused by the employers themselves because they want to make profits. And unfortunately, the Department of Employment of Labor will not have enough resources. Also, the Department of Home Affairs, for those who employ somebody who is illegal. It's not illegal to employ a person who came here to South Africa as a migrant and they've got documents. But it's illegal to employ those who came illegally, because those who came illegally need to be deported. So it is the lack of capacity for now in the two departments that are responsible for some of these things that we need to accede to. And we have even approved Treasury, as I'm talking about, I'm talking to you now, to ask them that there are certain areas where we are found weak because of lack of staffing, because the the Treasury has left a moratorium on the hiring of people.
Yeah.
There is a ceiling, and we told them that because of this ceiling, we are not able to employ enough immigration officers, but also in Home Affairs, enough people who man our Home Affairs office where you take IDs. And Treasury has agreed, they have given us something. It's better than nothing, and we are going to try and employ more people, especially in migration, especially immigration officers and people who man our Home Affairs offices. We are going to be advertising a few jobs because we've been struggling with Treasury for the past 3 years. Eventually, they've come out to the party, and we're happy about it.
Minister, earlier you touched on the critical skills list. I'm going to ask for your indulgence, if you will. I know we are meant to release you at past, but let's just take a quick break.
No, you are not forced to. You are not forced to.
All right.
So release me at past. If you still have issues, I'm prepared to answer them. I'm here.
Wonderful. In fact, maybe we might just have a nice debate between yourself and people like Musi Maimane, who are meant to join at around past. So I'm glad you're making that commitment. So we'll keep the minister.
No. I'm making a commitment to talk to you, not to debate with Maimane. Please, don't extend it. I'm just saying if you need 30 more minutes or 20 more minutes with me, I'm still here.
All right.
But I want to talk to you, not to debate with Maimane, please.
All right, that's fine. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll wrap up with Minister Motsoaledi. You're watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show. It is the talking point, and we are in conversation with the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, and we're talking about the issue of skills in the country versus the employment of foreigners. Minister Motsoaledi, earlier we were touching on the critical skills list, which you said that this was something that you specifically picked up on, and it's something that had been neglected, but you've dusted it off and you have now put it back on the agenda. Can I just ask you, are you aware of our skills ranking as a country versus other countries? Do you know where we stand right now?
Well, no, unfortunately, I don't.
Let me tell you.
All I know is that, yes, okay.
Let me tell you. So the World Economic Forum, this is their global competitive index. It puts our skills ranking at 101 out of 141 countries. That's nearly at the bottom of that skills ranking index. And so the question that people like Musi Maimane, for example, he writes in the article that if we are to really reindustrialize in South Africa, we are going to need critical skills such as those of engineers that we were speaking about in the instance of Eskom, for example, or even artisans, if we are to get factories working again. And the truth is, Minister, we are not well endowed with these skills, are we?
No, I agree with him. The critical skills list is exactly about that, about putting in the government gazette list of skills for which there's a shortage in South Africa and allow companies to get those skills internationally. By the way, we might be at the bottom, but even countries at the top, they do need skills elsewhere. There's no country in the world that will claim that they've got all the skills they need within the borders of their country. It's not possible. Even highly industrialized countries like the US, if you go there, you'll find many Chinese nationals who are working, for instance, at Silicon Valley and all that. So it is true. I agree with him. That's why we came with this list. But to compile it, we had to be very careful what we put on the list. For instance, during the compilation, the legal profession was fighting us that we must put law on that list. It doesn't mean that law is not important. It's important. Actually, they run our lives. Judges are the most important people, even with more powers than the president and parliament. But they are not on the critical skills list because we do not have a shortage in that regard. So you must understand what the critical skill is.
Okay.
It's a skill that is needed by the economy, but that is in short supply inside the borders of the country.
Can I ask you this question, Minister? Has this conversation, because it is clearly on the agenda, you've heard the President being confronted about it, and we are also seeing on the streets constant protest, and we are seeing also the issue of operations like Dudula that are on the go. Can I ask you the question about whether this conversation around foreign nationals being in the country, has it ignored what many political observers are saying will be a continued migration into South Africa by people of Eswatini, Zimbabwe, or even those escaping the potential threats of terrorism in Mozambique? These are people who are running away from countries who are either engaged in violent repression of their citizens or even corruption. Has this conversation ignored that element, Minister?
Absolutely not. We can't ignore that element, Toli, because what we are seeing is regulated. A person who's running away from their country do not just run to the next country. It's very clearly regulated and written down by the United Nations Convention of 1951, which was ratified by many nations in 1967. We only ratified it by 1996 because we were not a democracy in 1967 when many countries ratified it. And ratification means it even goes to Parliament to be passed. And that happened in 1996. Now, what does that convention say? It clearly outlines the conditions under which a person may leave their country and run to the next door country and be under international protection. And that convention is under the auspices of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And what does it say? It says clearly you are allowed to run if there's a natural disaster in your country. Natural disaster will be things like fires, volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes. Secondly, if there is war in our country, and I already hear you are venturing on the issue of what's happening in Mozambique, if there is war in your country, or alternatively, if you are being persecuted as an individual in your country because of your political beliefs and practices, because of your traditional beliefs and practices, because of your religious beliefs and preachings, or because of your sexual orientation, you are now allowed to run into the country. And when you arrive here, you then have to report yourself to the Refugee Reception Center. And we've got 5 of them in South Africa, in Pretoria, in Cape Town, in Gqeberha, in eThekwini, and in Musina. You arrive there and say, I'm running away, and you give those reasons. And there's a person trained called Refugee Status Determination Officer who will listen to your story and see whether you are given a Section 22 permit under as an asylum seeker or a Section 24 permit as a fully fledged refugee under international protection. So it doesn't just happen illegally, it doesn't happen at random.
Okay, yes. All right. Minister, very briefly for me, I have to let you go. The question I am putting out, and it was at the very start of this conversation, is whether South Africa's worsening unemployment is to blame or can be blamed on foreigners being in South Africa. What's your response to that question?
I cannot claim that, Dolly. I can't, because we understand the issues of the stagnant economy, the structural problems in the economy. But so I can't claim that that has caused unemployment is caused by the fact that other people are here from other countries. But when you have got such problems, obviously when you have got a few jobs, those who are inside the country will legitimately expect that they are the ones who must be first in line with the jobs. And as the president has said, many other countries have done so. Actually, when countries were ratifying the United Nations Convention of 1967, and I've got a copy here, if you want it, you can get it. When they ratified it, many of them had exemptions in that ratification. They say, I'm ratifying this, but for this type of jobs, no. I'm ratifying this, but for this type of thing, I'm not agreeing. Unfortunately, when South Africa ratified the convention in 1996, we are the only country, maybe one of the few, if not the only one, who signed it without any exemptions whatsoever. And we are also reviewing that in Home Affairs. So many people have signed for what you are saying long ago, as far back as 1967, about what is good for their country and what is good for migrants.
Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, thank you very much for your time.